In fact, he was known as Saul of Tarsus. When he started his ministry, he started his ministry. You can see it in Acts 13. He started his ministry under the identity of Saul of Tarsus. And his habit was to first go into the synagogue. Well, of course, when Saul of Tarsus walks into any synagogue in the nation of Israel, any synagogue, he goes with a reputation. He was a high-ranking Pharisee from Jerusalem. And he walks in with that title. He walks in with authority, and he begins to speak in the synagogue. They're listening. And some of them get saved because this is Saul of Tarsus. They're listening. But also some begin, after he speaks for a while, some begin to rise up and going, wait a second, that's countering the law. That's countering what we're preaching. You're preaching against our institution. Hold up, and they begin to persecute him. They send him out. And then all of a sudden, he changes his name from Saul. That's a good Jewish name. From Saul to Paul. That's a good Roman name. And he goes from being Saul of Tarsus, the Pharisee, to all of a sudden he goes to Paul. And watch what he does and what his strategy changes. In Acts 18, it says, after this, Paul left Athens and he went to Corinth. And there he met a Jew named Aquila, a native of Pontus, and was recently come from Italy with his wife Priscilla, because Claudius, who's the emperor of the time, had ordered all of the Jews to leave Rome. And Paul went to see them, and because he was a tent maker, as they were, he stayed and worked with them. Okay, now watch. Saul of Tarsus initially would walk into a city, and he would preach from the pulpit of the synagogue with the authority of a religious leader, with a persona of a religious leader. And here, all of a sudden, he changes. In Corinth, he changes his persona and he begins to work. Look at this. He begins to work as Paul, a Roman citizen, a tent maker in the community. So what happens? What happens is all of a sudden, a whole bunch of people get saved, and the same things happen. A bunch of people get saved, a great movement happens, and the Jews rise up in the exact same way to persecute him. And Paul's thinking, here we go again. Now I'm getting booted out of here. But watch what happens in this trial. Acts 18, it says this, verse 12. When Gallio was proconsul of Achaia, Gallio was the Roman proconsul. Proconsul like Pilate was a proconsul, which means the Roman appointed authority over the region, okay? He's the chief. He's the head of the region. When Gallio was proconsul of Achaia, the Jews of Corinth made a united attack on Paul and brought him to the place of judgment. This man, they charged, is persuading the people to worship God in ways contrary to the law. What Gallio should have done, what every other proconsul had done, what Pilate had done. See, Pilate didn't find Jesus guilty. Pilate appeased the Jewish crowd because Pilate's job as proconsul was to keep peace in the region. And if there's a whole bunch of worked up Jews that could create riots and problems, then he will do whatever. If it means killing one man, okay, we'll kill one man to appease that crowd and we have peace in the region. That's why Pilate, had Jesus killed. This Gallio should have, to appease the Jews like every other proconsul, should have said, you're right. He's upset you guys. Okay, fine. You can have him do that. But Gallio doesn't do that. This is what he says, just as Paul was about to speak. Because Paul's about to speak because he's like, here I go again. I'm going to make a defense for myself. It's me against all these guys. Paul's about to speak, Gallio interrupts him and says this: if you Jews were making a complaint about some misdemeanor or serious crime, it would be reasonable for me to listen to you. But since it involves questions and words and names that in your law, settle the matter yourselves. I will not be a judge of such things. And so it sounds like he's just washing his hands, but wait a second. The fact that he's not willing to appease this riot is different. It's different. But what's even more different is what happens next. What happens next in verse 16, it says, so he drove them off. Gallio drove the Jewish rioters off, the religious leaders off. Then the crowd, not the Christians, the crowd, what was that? This was the city of Corinth, comes out because there's a big disturbance. We want to go see. We want to watch what's happening. The crowd that there's watching this disturbance, there turns on Sosthenes, the synagogue leader, and beat him in front of the proconsul, and Gallio showed no concern whatsoever. I'm like, hold up. Previously, Paul gets kicked out of a region. When Paul presented himself as Saul of Tarsus, the religious leader, kicked out of the region. Nobody there to defend him. And all of a sudden, in the very city that he goes as Paul, the Roman citizen, the tent maker, he changed his pulpit and the position of his pulpit. And the moment he did that, it was the community themselves that defended him. Watch this. The next verse. Paul stayed in Corinth for some time. Yeah, he did. He got kicked out of the region everywhere else. And when Paul stays in a place for some time, come on, Paul moved with a different level of authority. The church, 3/4 of our New Testament, in Paul's words, he had authority over the church. When he stays in Corinth for a period of time, we have 1st and 2nd Corinthians. Like, he had an impact on this church for a reason. And the church was able to grow stronger there because Paul was able to stay. And the reason why Paul was able to stay is because all of a sudden Paul began to learn. He was getting souls saved everywhere. But he began to learn. Lasting fruit happens if I change my approach, if I rethink, if I can deconstruct my upbringing of understanding that religious things happen from the synagogue. If I can change the pulpit and realize that religious things don't just happen from the synagogue, that if I can understand that God still moves with the same power and the same authority, if not more so, when I move my pulpit to the marketplace. And when I can preach from here, when I change and rethink from thinking church, that all of my spiritual walk and all of my time with God is spent in my religious part of my life is in church. If I can change that thinking and realize that I'm part of the ecclesia, which is a gathering of citizens who take care of the concerns of their city. When I understand that I'm an ecclesia and I can be a tent maker and I can make a contribution so great to that city that city will defend me. I'm going to stay there.